Hello and welcome to Alan History Nerd. In this video I'm looking at the build-up to the Persian invasion of Greece in 480 BC. So this is part of my series on ancient history, and in it we're going to be going through the Persian Wars and then onto the Peloponnesian Wars, looking at this really important period of Greek and well, essentially world history. So this is designed for A-level ancient history, the OCR spec, and the specification tells us that there are certain things that you guys need to know. So you need to know Persian aims and intentions in the 480s, Darius and Xerxes policies towards the Greek states, Greek and Persian preparations for the 480s, differences in response to the Persians among the Greek states, including medising, the formation of the Hellenic League and its leadership, and states involved in the Hellenic League. So we're going to try and cover as much of that as we can, and because this is ancient history in the way that A-level ancient history is assessed, I'm going to be constantly making reference to the ancient sources. So we're going to use elements of Herodotus in this. I'm also going to make reference to some of the archaeological sources that we use as well. So hopefully this will give you a good understanding of this bit and preparation or a kind of a run into the main events really of the Persian Wars, when we'll look at what happened in future videos in when Xerxes does invade Greece. So what were the Persian aims and intention in the 480s? Well, Darius was looking for revenge following Marathon. Herodotus tells us about this in chapter 7.1, and was planning a much bigger invasion of the one that he'd initially tried. However, his plans for this much bigger invasion are kind of held up by an Egyptian rebellion in 486, and then the fact that he actually dies, which kind of puts a bit of a kibosh on him actually going and invading and conquering anywhere else. So he is succeeded by his son Xerxes, and well, we can ask the question: Did Xerxes share his father's desire for revenge? And our insight into this comes largely from Herodotus, who suggests that to start off with, at least, Xerxes was not massively interested in Greece and sending this big invading army, but was persuaded to do so by Mardonis. And this went against the advice of Artabanus. So we kind of get an insight into the Persian court through Herodotus, and this argument is played out in Herodotus. This is in between chapter 7.5 and chapter 7.10 or 7.10. And in this, we've got these different voices kind of trying to persuade Xerxes one way or the other. Now, Mardonius was involved earlier with a kind of a failed mission into Greece, so maybe he again, revenge is big for him. He wants to leave his mark and be successful this time. And we then got this kind of other character playing seemingly the voice of reason and trying to dissuade Xerxes. So it's important that in your writing about ancient history for the A-level spec, that you not only make reference to the ancient sources and what they say, but you have some evaluation. This is kind of one of the big bits of the mark schemes, AO3, that you're evaluating the primary sources as you're writing about it. And so if we're going to evaluate Herodotus giving us this insight into what was happening in the Persian court, well, it's hard really, I think, to believe that Herodotus could be able to accurately report speeches from the Persian court many decades after they had taken place. So this idea that what we have in Herodotus is word for word what happened in the Persian court early on is probably not completely true. There were, however, Greeks at court, Hippias and Demetrius, and there were Greek-speaking Persians as well. So that there is a line through which, because again, we know what Herodotus says, we know the kind of the methods he uses in gathering it, but we don't have his notes. We don't have where he got everything from. So there are possible lines where this could be passed on to Herodotus, and the people who were there go, "This is what was said. This is what happened." There is, however, a bit more to it in terms of the way that the speeches and the characters are presented, and that all gives us some reason for doubt that this is exactly what happened, because it's all a little bit too Greek. This is particularly true with the presentation of Artabanus, who's Xerxes' uncle, who plays the role seen much in kind of Athenian and Greek tragedies of this kind of wise advisor who gives great foresight into what is going to happen, but is ignored, but then later on proven to be right, and that's part of the tragedy of these things, where because there was somebody there going, if you do this, you are on this path to this horrible things, don't do it. There's a lot in there about Greek bravery in fighting, strength on land and at sea, God's displeasure with anybody who tries to rise too high. Again, very much a Greek attitude to the world, this idea that the gods will punish anybody who gets kind of above themselves, and the idea of moderation. Talks about the danger of haste, again, kind of a moralistic thing that we imagine in Greek writing. Then there's more practical bits in this, like the risk of long supply lines, and we will know, well, when we get on to the main part of the Persian Wars, that actually the long supply lines were one of the most significant problems for the Persians. And then there's a bit about Mardonius is kind of slandering the Greeks, and that the invasion would lead to failure and death, and this is in Herodotus 7.10, 7.10, and it kind of this foresight, this warning, and again, Mardonius is kind of the villain in it. Artabanus is kind of the wise kind of voice of reason. So there probably was a debate about whether they should invade or not. There were probably different voices. These might well be what was there. But again, as is often the case with ancient history, our sources are limited. Now, what you would need to do if you were writing about this and you're using this as part of something you're writing in an essay, is you just need to show this some understanding of this, some evaluation of how reliable and effective the source is in this instance. So, right, so we can make our judgment about whether this debate is a 100% accurate representation of what happened, but I think it's worth looking at some of the stuff in it. So Mardonius is the key proponent of the invasion. He had not been involved in 490, but had led a campaign in 492. He was Xerxes' cousin and brother-in-law, and so he was an influential figure at the court. And he seems to be kind of obsessed with the idea of invading Greece. I mean, it's possibly understandable given the size of his empire that maybe this isn't the main thing on Xerxes' mind. And this might give us a bit of a side. Maybe there is a great deal of liability in this, because although obviously the Greeks are obsessed with Greece, it doesn't necessarily mean all the Persians were, because Persia was this massive empire. They ruled this incredible number of lands and peoples. So this is a kind of a quote from Herodotus. The Athenians have done us great injury, and it is not only right that they should be punished for their crimes. Lead an army against Athens, do that, and your name will be held in honor all over the world. People will think twice in future before they invade your country. So this is Mardonius speaking here, and this would be kind of supported by aristocratic Greek families, the Pisistrates and the Eliads from Thessaly, who were kind of pushing this up. We might be able to support this idea. Artabanus then argues that Xerxes will run into serious trouble with poorly maintained supply lines if he underestimates Greek military capability. So this might just be a kind of a warning about how strong Greece is. But what he says, so far as I know, there is not a harbour anywhere big enough to receive this fleet of yours and give it protection in the event of storms. So I would have you realize, my lord, that men are at the mercy of circumstances, not their master. And is this warning about that there are things you can't control, and issues and things that need to be considered. So these are the different voices that are speaking. Again, maybe we've got this idea, particularly from Mardonius, that this one blot on the legacy of Darius was that he failed to take Greece, and maybe if other other parts of the empire saw that the Greeks could stand against Persia, then maybe there would be more problems from elsewhere as well. So Xerxes decides to invade. We can see again from Herodotus 7.50, 7.50 that he accepts there are risks, but he states he will conquer Europe, and we assume through this he means Greece, and return triumphant. He dismisses the concerns over supply lines, and this gives us this idea that Xerxes is fairly kind of immature and arrogant, that he just ignores this kind of advice from an elder who's got a better idea of what's going on. He argues that if earlier Persian kings had ignored risk or hadn't ignored risk, then the empire wouldn't be as great as it was. So you kind of go, well, there's risk involved, but the Persian kings, we are risk takers. That's how we have gained this enormous empire. And he's very proud of the kind of the line that he comes from, particularly with the achievements of his father. So he kind of goes, my father took risk and was successful. The previous Persian kings taking risk and be successful. This is what we are going to do. So he is portrayed negatively in the Greek sources of immature and arrogant. Again, probably the most powerful man on earth at the time. Maybe that might lead to him being arrogant. His decisions don't ultimately work, so you can see why that view might come across. Whether it's 100% accurate or not, we can't be absolutely certain. One of the problems is that there are very limited Persian sources remaining for us. Now, one of the bits that there is the royal inscriptions at the gates of all lands at Persepolis. It doesn't fully match with the Greek sources. Xerxes comes across as very pious, so he talks about this great God who created earth, who created heaven, who created man, who created happiness for man, and made Xerxes king. So he's again, that seems to go against this arrogant line that he's kind of going, well, look, no, there's all my power comes from this God. He's very proud of his father's achievements. I am Xerxes, the great king of kings. Again, maybe some of the arrogance slipping out here. The king of all countries and of many men. The king in this great earth far and wide, son of Darius, and then again mention the family name. So we've got in this. So maybe that some of this matches with some of this idea that we see in the Greek sources, but also there's some important bits in here. But as we see reverence for his God and for his father, so we see great piety. So he's not placing himself above everything. He's placing himself above other kings, but he's not placing himself above everything because there's, again, a God, a creator, above him. And he was the king of a vast empire. So he says, I think, can definitely be seen as arrogant. When he says, I am king of kings, well, he was. And he did have a vast empire made of many different peoples and nations. So he probably sought expansion. Well, definitely sought expansion. He probably, part of this was wanting revenge for his father's defeat. Again, we see his pride in his father and in his family name. It is, however, as I said earlier, fairly logical to assume that Persia was a much bigger deal for the Greeks than Greece was for Xerxes and the Persians. And it's always worth remembering, almost all the sources we look at in this are looking from a Greek perspective, and the Persians are the invaders, they're the outsiders, and it's all about Greek freedom and heroics and stuff like that. Whilst the Persians are looking at it, this is the next chunk of land along and the next group of people to add to their empire. So they aren't as obsessed with the Greeks as the Greeks are with them. So Greek preparations in the 480s. Well, we see a number of Greek states create the Hellenic League at the end of this. The members pledge to end conflict between the member states, send spies to find out Persian plans and what they're up to, and recruit as many Greek states as they can. In Herodotus 7.145, we see some evidence of the first meeting. Up top of this, there's an oath to resist Persians and punish Greeks who do not. We see this in Herodotus 7.132, and we also, again, we have some other sources on this one as well. The idea was that the Spartans would lead the military. The pledge that they make doesn't actually hold, and one of the reasons for that is because so many Greek states medised. There isn't this idea of this being strong unified Greece is just not true. Greece is seldomly anywhere nearly remotely unified at this point in time. This is no exception. But those states who are determined to resist, make their oath, you've got Sparta, who similarly is taking a lead with the military, again, which makes sense because they're Sparta. Again, worth noting, Sparta's not in Scotland; it is in Greece, despite what it comes across in the 300. We will look at the battles in a future video, and we will look at Thermopylae and Salamis and all the key battles in the war with Persia. Another key piece of evidence for us on this is the serpent column, which was raised in Delphi, is now in Istanbul. And it contains of the names of the 31 states who played a role at the Greek victory in Plataea. So this, again, is more evidence. So we've got Herodotus and other Greek sources that are telling us that there was a league and Greek states were gathering together in preparation. And then we've got the serpent column that tells us, look, these are the states that stood and fought against the Persians, particularly in the victory at Plataea. Sparta is at the top of the column, followed by Athens, then Corinth, and this suggests to us that the higher up the column that you are, probably the bigger your involvement was at this point, the more that you contributed in terms of men or money or whatever it was. And we know that the Spartans were the key force at Plataea. Interestingly, 5 cities named by Herodotus as being in the league are not on the column. And around half the cities on the column were part of or closely linked to the Peloponnesian League that the Spartans led. So that would suggest that in the build-up to, and then eventually in the Persian invasion, that in terms of Greek leadership, that Greek leadership is coming from Sparta. However, that isn't the whole story, but that's an important part of it. So let's have a look at some of the responses to the Persians among the Greek states. So part of this is medising. So medising is when they essentially accepted Persian rule, and there was the symbolic giving of earth and water to symbolise the idea that they accepted a Persian hegemony, and we did see a number of states who kind of gave tokens of submission. There's details of this in Herodotus 7.132, including the Thebans and other Boeotians and Plataea. Obviously, there's a really significant battle there. So these states medised; they accepted the Persian rule. And all these other states were sent heralds to ask them and say, look, you either can fight us, we are a mighty empire, we will destroy you, or you can accept our dominance and we'll treat you quite nicely. They didn't send heralds to Sparta and Athens because of the highly antagonistic treatment they'd given to the heralds of Darius. So Xerxes didn't send them. We see details in this in 7.133 in Herodotus. And I think this is important. Part of the motivation argued in terms of what Xerxes was up to was revenge against Athens. The invasion was aimed to take Athens. So we've seen some evidence that maybe Sparta was taking a lead, but actually Athens is a really important part of this story. Now, in Herodotus, in 7.139 or 7.139, he writes a very impassionate defence of the significant contribution in defending Greece made by Athens. He argues that without Athens and its fleet, Greece would have fallen to Persia. He tells about the terrible warnings of the Oracle of Delphi regarding Athens' fate if it fought Persia, and in a way this makes the fact that Athens stands and fights even braver. The Oracle is seemingly saying, look, bad things are happening and you're probably better off running. You're just going to be potentially going to be destroyed. This is again a really useful section to show Herodotus as pro-Athenian, and also showing his belief in the significance of oracles. Now this then leads us back to the kind of source analysis we did earlier, where we've got this key kind of figure in Persia kind of giving this forewarning of what is going to happen if Xerxes invades. And in this point we've now got the Delphic oracle kind of foretelling of what is going to happen, but the interpretation of that of what the oracle says turns to be absolutely essential. And we see one of kind of Herodotus' great heroes appear out of all of this. So there was a debate in Athens of what they should do, particularly given the information from the oracle. And so this is covered in Herodotus 7.141 to 7.144. In this, Themistocles emerges as the key leader. So he defines, he interprets the wording around Salamis as divine and not hateful, and obviously there will then be a great victory for the Athenians at Salamis over the Persians. And this talking of the wooden wall, he says that isn't that Athens should sit and defend and build a wall around itself. This is what it means here. This is the Athenian fleet. And this more positive interpretation of the oracle's warning and the preparation that it leads to, in Athens in particular, but in other states as well, to meet the Persians at sea, is very much, in Herodotus' view, key to the Greek survival. And what this suggests is that actually it's Athens and Themistocles that are taking the lead in the upcoming, in the preparation for and then in the upcoming war against Persia, which gives us a slight shift from some of the stuff that we've seen earlier in terms of the setup of the Hellenic League. We look at the seven-side column, and it's dominated by Sparta to start with, and then by Sparta's allies. But Plataea is a land battle, and what Herodotus is saying is actually the key to defeating the Persians is at sea, and it's the strength of the Athenian fleet that will prove to be a kind of really, really significant. And this is really important as we go through the kind of this unit as a whole, because following the Persian War, which we'll look at, we then get onto the Peloponnesian War, and in that we see the rise of Athens, and Athens' power is always in its fleet, and this can go back to Themistocles as one of the kind of the great Athenian leaders and heroes of this time, and leadership is an important theme in this unit. So I hope that's been of some use to you. As I said, my intention is to continue making videos on this unit and to take you through the story. So there should be a build-up of going through the Persian War and then on to the Peloponnesian. And as I go through, I will try and hopefully make some sense of it and give you some links into the ancient sources and a little bit of evaluation of those sources as I go through as well. Thank you very much for watching. If you've liked it, then please give us a like. If you've got any questions or comments, leave them below. If you haven't done so already, please do subscribe to the channel, Alan History Nerd. There's going to be loads on there for ancient history. There's already loads on there for other periods of history, and there's also, if you want to go really modern, loads and loads of politics stuff on there as well. Thank you very much for watching.